Bildad spoke again, then Job spoke again, and round we go on this roundabout of futile friendship, as all four continue to offer up their theories on the reasons why Job is suffering. And Paul continues to review his resume to the Corinthians. Today on 3-in-1, as we consider Job chapters 25 through 27 and 2 Corinthians chapter 12. How can a mortal be innocent before God? Bildad belts out. I just don't get it, Job. It just doesn't make any sense to me. God is God, man is man, God is holy, man at his best is a maggot in comparison. How then can a mortal man be innocent in the eyes of God? A good question, Bildad, but you're starting from the wrong place. Job may be, as we read in chapter 1, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil, but he's not innocent. He's not sinless. He is a sinner, like you said, like everyone else. It's just that his suffering has nothing to do with his sin. So, Bildad, you're all worked up and belting out these questions that have nothing to do with the root issue. Now, thankfully, this time, Job doesn't give Bildad long to pontificate before he interrupts. And then, once again, Job gives us a guided tour around this roundabout that we've been on again and again and again. But this time, there are a few gems in an otherwise frustrating journey. Like the time that Job said in verse 7 of chapter 26, God stretches the northern sky over empty space and hangs the earth on nothing. Ha ha! Hundreds of years ago this was written. Thousands of years ago this was written. And since then, man has had a multitude of theories. But Job had it right from the beginning. God stretches the northern sky over empty space and hangs the earth on nothing. And there was a surprising amount of information concerning creation contained within this exchange between Job and his friends today, like the very next verse. He wraps the rain in his thick clouds, and the clouds don't burst with the weight. Now, how did Job know that clouds actually weighed so much? Did you know that clouds weigh a ton? Well, now, a ton is just an expression, but actually the weight of the average cumulus cloud is 1.1 million pounds. I mean, that's a lot of tons. I mean, think of that the next time you're looking up outside. 1.1 million pounds all over your head. And then you think of Job's statement here in verse 8. He wraps the rain in his thick clouds, and the clouds don't burst with the weight. Man, truly, the heavens declare the glory of God. And as Job said in verse 14, these are just the beginning of all that he does, merely a whisper of his power. So yes, today, thankfully, there were some gems given to us through Job in between his bitterness towards his friends and his bitterness towards God. It's fairly clear from what we read in chapter 27 that Job still feels as though he's being treated unfairly by God, and that he still wants to plead his case and say, God, I am a blameless and upright man. I am one who fears God and shuns evil, as if God didn't know that already. But the problem is, Job didn't know that this suffering had nothing to do with God treating him according to his sin, or lack thereof. Job just didn't know why this was happening at all, and God wasn't going to tell him. So what do you do? What do we do when that happens? Because that happens a lot, doesn't it? I mean, there's a lot of things that happen in our lives that are really difficult to deal with. And for some reason, we always search for the reason. We search for the reason that all this is happening, as if we understand the meaning in suffering, that will ease the suffering. In a certain sense, I can see how that would be soothing. But how often does that actually happen? I mean, how often does God crack the sky and tell us specifically exactly why we are going through a trial, a tribulation, or a season of suffering? Not all that often, if ever, right? So what do we do? Well, we could have a marathon conversation with others, offering up our theories, trying to find meaning in our suffering like angry, blind men, because that's working so well for these four here, right? Or we could simply surrender what we don't know to God, trusting that He's good all the time. And then we could just be open to receive whatever comes our way, knowing that it all had to be filtered through his omniscience, through his omnipotence, and through his sovereignty. Now, I know that's easier said than done. But really, what's our alternative? I mean, this is such a common crossroads for all of us. And, I think so far the book of Job is helping us to see the futility of being bound up and bitter in our own understanding. I mean, that's the alternative. And yet, there's another way. And it's described for us in this attitude of surrender to the Lord. Listen to Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5, 6, and 7. It says there, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not depend on your own understanding. Seek his will in all you do, and he will show you which path to take. Don't be impressed with your own wisdom. Instead, fear the Lord and turn away from evil." Good lessons to learn, lessons that the Corinthians had yet to learn as they assessed the ministry of the Apostle Paul from a purely worldly vantage point. See, we said that the Apostle Paul would defend his ministry and review his resume, but did you think it would be like this? I mean, line upon line of showing just how weak he was? How does that prove to the Corinthians that he was qualified to be an apostle? And that's such a good question, isn't it? How does Paul's weakness prove to the Corinthians that he was qualified to be an apostle? And I hope that that question hangs with you all week, because the answer is revolutionary. I mean, it's seriously world-changing. Even as we read today, as Paul was talking about the thorn in his side, in his flesh. He says, "I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger from Satan to torment me." Some suffering of some kind. What kind, we don't know. But what we do know is that Paul seized upon this suffering as an opportunity to give God glory, seeing the good even in the midst of suffering. And he said, "I have received such wonderful revelations from God, so to keep me from becoming proud, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger from Satan to torment me and keep me from becoming proud." To keep me usable and teachable. What Satan intended for evil, God allowed for good. Kind of like the book of Job. Now, that's not to say that Paul received all of this gladly right away. In fact, he confessed to us today that he called out to God 3 times, "Take this away, God." And each time God said, "My grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness." And what a lesson to learn. And one that I'm still learning, one that it seems that the Apostle Paul actually learned and actively walked in. For he would go on to say, "So now I am glad to boast about my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ can work through me. That's why I take pleasure in my weaknesses and in the insults, hardships, persecutions, and troubles that I suffer for Christ. For when I am weak, then I am strong." I cannot count the number of times that I have felt so weak walking up to that pulpit. I mean, almost to the point of being incapacitated. But somehow, Sunday after Sunday, God gives grace. Unmerited favor, infused with the very power of God. And his grace is all that you need. His power works best in weakness. So what you may have seen as a liability in the past, as far as your weakness and inability, is actually what qualifies you for ministry. If you combine that awareness of your own inability with faith in God's ability, knowing, the kind of knowing where you stomp your foot, knowing that there is nothing too hard for our God, knowing that he longs to show himself strong on behalf of those whose hearts are towards him, knowing that he loves to use the foolish and forgotten ones, the weak ones, that the world would just throw away, knowing that nothing can separate you from his love, not even suffering, and knowing that his grace is all that you need, and that his power works best in weakness.